The snow had come early that year, blanketing the quiet mountain village of Halden in silence. The townsfolk, already used to the cold, moved through the streets with the resigned rhythm of winter, shoulders hunched, boots crunching over frost-hardened earth, breath rising in faint white trails. But even in a village where little changed, something felt different that morning. A hush deeper than snowfall. A presence. It was Jonas, the groundskeeper of the cemetery, who found it first. He had come to clear the fresh snow from the path between the graves when he stopped, startled by a strange shape lying at the far end of the graveyard. It wasn't a pile of branches. It wasn't a sleeping dog. It was a bear cub. Tiny for its kind but unmistakable, fur matted with snow, head resting solemnly beside a newly packed grave. It didn't stir at Jonas's approach. It didn't growl. It just stared ahead, as if guarding something sacred. The headstone it lay beside was new. So new, in fact, that the chisel marks were still visible on the simple wooden cross staked into the earth. Thomas Hale, 78, a gentleman. Jonas took a cautious step back, heart pounding. A bear this close to the village, and lying still like that? He turned and ran to fetch the others. Within the hour, a quiet group gathered at the edge of the cemetery. No one dared get close. "There's no way it just wandered here," whispered Greta, the baker's wife. "It's not acting wild," murmured the schoolteacher. "It's mourning." Old man Thomas had passed just 4 days earlier. He had lived in a cabin on the edge of the woods, beyond the northern ridge. Reclusive but kind, he had spent most of his life alone, visiting the village only for supplies and to speak to children about forest plants and animal tracks. Everyone knew Thomas. But no one really knew him. Not like this. Not enough to explain the bear cub curled at his grave like a grieving child. Mayor Stein arrived by late morning and advised against harming the cub. "It's not threatening anyone," he said. "We watch. We wait. If it turns, we handle it then." But the bear didn't turn. It stayed. Through the afternoon snow. Through the howling wind. Through the deepening night. The villagers left food at a distance. Berries, scraps, even a small bowl of water. The cub didn't touch any of it. It didn't move. Only when night fell, and the sky turned ink-black with stars, did the bear lift its head. It gave a soft sound, not quite a whimper, not quite a growl, then settled back into the earth like it belonged there. Like it had lost something it would never get back. And though no one dared speak it aloud, they all knew what the look in the cub's eyes meant. It had loved him. It had been nearly a year earlier, in the pale muddy thaw of spring, when Thomas Hale found the cub. He hadn't gone into the woods looking for it. His days of wandering deep trails and charting old bear dens were long behind him. Age had slowed his legs and stiffened his hands, but not his eyes, and certainly not his heart. He had gone down to the river, basket in hand, to collect early spring herbs. That's when he heard it, a frantic rustling, something small crashing through brambles, followed by a panicked whimper. He froze. The sound of pain in the wild was different from fear. It had an edge to it. A pleading. When he crept closer, parting the undergrowth with the end of his walking stick, he saw it, a bear cub, no larger than a golden retriever, its back leg twisted unnaturally, caught in a snare trap. Blood stained its dark fur. Its chest heaved with rapid breaths. Their eyes met. And in that moment, Thomas didn't see danger. He saw desperation. It took him nearly 20 minutes to get close enough to disable the snare. The cub thrashed at first, baring tiny teeth, snapping in fear, but Thomas kept talking slowly, gently. He whispered nonsense at first, then stories, then a lullaby he hadn't sung since he was a boy himself. By the time the trap was loosened, the cub was too weak to move. Thomas wrapped it in his coat. "I won't let you die alone," he murmured. He carried the cub 2 miles back to his cabin. For weeks, the forest around his home fell silent as Thomas became something of a caretaker. He fed the cub warm goat's milk and berries, cleaned the wound daily with boiled water and pine resin, and kept the small creature near the fire wrapped in an old wool blanket. The cub never roared, never attacked. It watched him with wide, unblinking eyes. On the 7th night, as the snow melted into soft dirt outside, the cub finally limped to the door and nudged it open with its nose, not to leave, but to sit quietly on the porch beside him, gazing at the forest beyond. From that moment on, it stayed close. Thomas named it Ash, for its dark fur and quiet temperament. Ash followed him everywhere, from his garden to the forest edge. It curled near his feet while he read books by lantern light. It pawed at his walking stick like a playful pup and often nudged his hands when he forgot to eat. No one else saw this side of Thomas, or Ash. It was their secret. He didn't tell the village. He didn't need to. The woods were their world. In the pages of his weather journal, Thomas wrote, "He isn't a pet. He isn't a project. He's the echo of something I never had, and never knew I needed." As the seasons turned, Ash grew bigger, stronger, but never wild. He didn't tear through the cabin or claw at the doors. He listened. He waited. He watched over Thomas like a guardian, like a child watching an aging father move too slowly for the world. They lived that way through the year. A man and a bear, bonded not by words, but by wounds, time, and quiet trust. And as autumn gave way to snow again, Thomas's cough worsened. His bones ached more than usual. He moved slower, slept longer, and wrote less. Ash stayed closer than ever. And when the fire dimmed for the last time in Thomas's cabin, Ash was there. Watching. Waiting. Refusing to let go. Spring turned to summer, and Ash's wounds healed. His once bony frame filled out with strength, his fur dark and thick, his stride more sure each day. But despite the strength growing in his body, he never left the side of the man who had rescued him. To the outside world, Thomas Hale remained the solitary old woodsman, quiet, eccentric, perhaps even a little touched in the head. But inside the forest, something extraordinary had taken root. Every day, the bond between Thomas and Ash deepened in silence, in small routines, in the kind of companionship that doesn't need words. Each morning, Thomas would step outside, thermos of tea in hand, and sit on the creaky porch bench. Ash would be waiting. Not leashed, not caged, simply present. They would watch the sunrise together as the mist lifted off the pine trees. Some days they walked the forest trails, Thomas slow and steady with his walking stick, Ash padding beside him, alert but calm. Thomas would talk about everything and nothing, the smell of birch bark, the memory of his childhood, the way grief sometimes clung to him like fog. Ash would listen, head occasionally tilting, as if trying to understand. Once, they found a wounded hawk caught in old netting. Ash sat perfectly still while Thomas gently freed it. The hawk flew off into the fading orange sky, and Thomas chuckled, placing a hand on the bear's thick shoulder. Two old souls, patching up the world, one broken thing at a time. The bond was unspoken but visible, in the way Ash always curled at the foot of the porch before nightfall, in how he growled low when foxes crept too close to the garden, in the way he would wait outside the outhouse like a watchful sibling. When Thomas fell ill for the first time in early autumn, just a cough at first, then shortness of breath, Ash sensed the shift. He stayed even closer. He began leaving small things on the porch, pine cones, twigs, and once, a smooth stone shaped like a heart. Thomas laughed, calling them gifts. "A courtship ritual," he teased. "Or maybe you're just tidying up your forest." Ash simply huffed and nudged Thomas's foot. The villagers, though still unaware of the full bond, noticed something was different about Thomas that year. He looked brighter, softer, like someone who had finally found a missing piece of himself. Greta, the baker's wife, once spotted Ash's large paw prints near the edge of the village and told her husband, "That man's not alone out there. And I don't think he's been for some time." Winter came quickly that year. The nights grew long, and the wind howled through the trees like lost spirits. Inside the cabin, the fire burned low, but the warmth between them never faded. Thomas often fell asleep mid-sentence in his chair, and Ash would nudge a blanket over him with his nose or press close to keep him warm. They were no longer just man and beast. They were companions in every sense, survivors who had found comfort in each other's scars. One night, as the snow piled high and the stars glittered sharp and cold above the trees, Thomas looked at Ash and whispered, "If I go before you, stay near." Ash blinked slowly. "I know you understand," Thomas added. "I've seen it in your eyes." Ash laid his massive head on Thomas's foot, and in the flickering firelight, they rested. Together. As if time itself had paused to honor the bond they'd built. The first morning Thomas didn't rise with the sun, Ash sensed something was wrong. Snow lay thick and untouched across the forest floor, muffling sound and casting the world in hushed white. The usual rhythm, the creak of the cabin door, the familiar cough, the hiss of the kettle, never came. Ash waited outside the door longer than usual, pacing in slow circles, then sitting still, ears perked toward the window. Silence. He nudged the door with his nose, as he often did. It creaked open slightly. Thomas had forgotten to latch it the night before. Inside, the fire had burned low to ash. The kettle was cold. A book lay open on the armrest of the rocking chair. And in the bed, beneath the quilt made of patchwork flannel and stitched with bear silhouettes, Thomas Hale lay still. No breath rose from his chest. No hand twitched in sleep. Ash stood at the threshold for several minutes, just watching. Then he stepped inside and placed his heavy head on the edge of the bed, gently, reverently. And he stayed there until the cabin began to grow dark again. By the next day, when the village noticed Thomas hadn't come for supplies or firewood, they sent Jonas and 2 others to check on him. They found Ash sitting silently beside the bed, eyes heavy and unreadable. The bear didn't growl or run. He simply rose, turned once to look back at Thomas, and followed the men outside as they carried the old man's body, as if giving permission. The village held a small burial ceremony at the edge of the cemetery where Thomas had once planted wildflowers. The townsfolk whispered prayers and laid pine branches beside the simple wooden marker. Ash watched from a distance at first, from the edge of the forest, unmoving. But as the last shovel of dirt was packed and the crowd dispersed in the falling snow, the cub stepped forward. To everyone's astonishment, he lay down on the grave. And didn't move. 1 day passed. Then 2. Ash refused to leave. Villagers brought food and placed it carefully nearby. Some tried to coax him away with soft voices or clanging pots, but nothing worked. He wouldn't leave the grave. Not even for shelter. Snow began to fall harder. Nights were bitter. But still the cub stayed, curled up against the frozen earth like a sentry, a statue, a shadow refusing to forget. The children in town began to call him the Grave Bear. And though some adults worried, none dared interfere. Because deep down, they all understood. Ash wasn't waiting for food. He was grieving. Just like any of them would. As the days passed and winter deepened, the villagers struggled with what to do. A wild animal living in the cemetery was dangerous, they reasoned, but no one had the heart to drive Ash away. So they watched. And the cub stayed. For weeks. Even through storms. Even when the snow came waist-deep and the wind howled through the gravestones like a spirit mourning the dead. One night, young Elsa, the schoolteacher's daughter, placed a lantern near the grave, shielding it with a small wooden box so the wind wouldn't blow it out. Inside the box was a journal. Her father had found it inside Thomas Hale's cabin when helping clean out the space. It was old. Leather-bound. The pages were worn and written in Thomas's hand. She placed it beside the bear, not expecting anything. The next morning, the lantern was still lit. And the journal had been nudged open. In the weeks that followed, word spread of what was written inside the pages. Not just notes about plants and weather, but memories. Of a life lived in solitude. Of a lost child Thomas once had, a daughter who died young and who, in his grief, he had never spoken of again. But then came the pages about Ash. I thought I had nothing left to give the world. But then I found him, broken like me. We were 2 halves of the same silence. He doesn't need my words. He understands my breath. My pause. My pain. This is not a beast. This is family. And near the end, written in shaky handwriting, I am not afraid to go. But I hope he remembers me longer than any man ever did. The villagers began visiting the grave more often after that, not to chase Ash away, but to leave tokens. Apples. Pine cones. Flowers. One little boy left a toy wooden bear he'd carved himself. No one tried to pet Ash or approach, but he became part of the cemetery's rhythm. People began to speak more gently in the graveyard. They brought their griefs there like folded letters, laying them beside the place where a bear mourned a man. It was somehow comforting to know that even in the wild, grief existed. Loyalty existed. Love didn't have to speak to be understood. One evening in early spring, the snow melted just enough to reveal something beside the grave that hadn't been there before. Clawed into the bark of a nearby tree were scratch marks. Not random gouges, but a shape. A pattern. A symbol. It was a crude spiral, the same one Thomas had carved into his cabin door, the one he'd told children represented the eternal loop of nature and memory. The villagers stood silently, gazing at it, and no one could say how it got there. Except, perhaps, Ash, who had begun rising from the grave earlier each morning, standing a little taller, looking farther into the woods, as if waiting for a sign, or preparing for a goodbye.